In the town of Azurville, residents know two things to be true. One, those who are born in Azurville die in Azurville. Two, those who die in Azurville stay in Azurville.
This is my house, my house, my house. I was born here, I grew up here, I died here. They can't make me leave, no. Grandpa set me up good, set all of us up good, really. It's those thieves, the spies who made the paperwork disappear. The government is trying to take this house away from me. No respect for tradition, no respect at all. This is my house, my house. They can't change the past. They can't rewrite history and say I wasn't born here. They try, but they can't change it. They can't change that this is my house. I see their spies everywhere, though. They hide in the walls. I caught one the other day. Heard him crawling behind my wallpaper like a starving rat. I couldn't rip it open to catch the bastard, but I screamed and screamed until finally he couldn't take it anymore. I watched as he scrambled out from his hiding place. I kept on screaming until the early morning just to be sure. He wasn't the first. He won't be the last. People coming in, thinking this is a vacant shell. They can't have it. This house is mine. These dirty, living people. You never realize how dirty people are until you die. My house may be covered in dust and cobwebs, but I'm as clean as a Sunday morning bath. All of that dust just flies right through me, lands back on the floor or the wall, if there's someone around to make the dust move in the first place. I see myself as a collector. The piles of dust are a testament to my time spent here, my dedication to this house. My house. I can't clean it up, so I might as well use it to measure time. God knows how long my clock's been out. Not everyone would bother with memorizing the little cracks in their walls, but they are as familiar to me as the wrinkles on my face. I know when the dust piles have climbed higher to my cracks, and I know when these cracks have grown bigger. There are quite a few in my kitchen, matter of fact. My husband had thought himself a craftsman and built on an addition. It held strong during our lives, but the mixture of old and new wood was beginning to show. Yeah, I would say maybe another decade or so before it caves in and falls over into the garden. My husband didn't want to stay with me after I died, which was about 20 years after his own death. He wanted to be there for me. He said, "Patricia, I'm here till death do us part." Well, then I died, and he decided that had parted us. He went over the cemetery with the rest of his family. I was the last of my family, so it was my duty to remain, something my husband couldn't do since he left me. Why did you leave? The past few years of my life were not easy. I couldn't get out of bed, couldn't shower or piss on my own, had to hire me a nurse, a useless little thing named Anne. She was so lazy, always late, always talking about Thailand. Oh, did you know this about Thailand? Did you know that about Thailand? She kept asking me why we couldn't leave, as if I knew the answer. I had no idea what she was talking about. As far as I could tell, people were capable of leaving as much as they wanted. Why? Why did you leave? Death was a relief. My arthritis was gone, no more coughing. Getting out of bed was easy now, not that I was ever crawling back into it. After so many years of being bedridden, you learn to never want to lie down again. Anne was let go after that. There was no fight. She had been distracted anyway, although she did say she was worried about me being by myself and asked if I wanted a replacement nurse. I asked what was the point. I was already dead. Last thing I told her to do was clean the house real good. That was something she took to heart. Every room was mopped and dusted, every sheet and every item of clothing was washed and folded. She asked if I wanted any of it sent to charity, but I refused. What was mine stayed mine. I just wanted it to stay clean for as long as possible. Then she asked if I wanted to keep out my wedding photos. I told her to throw them away. After that, she was gone, and I was left alone. That was when I began my collection. It took a while for the first layer of dust to really settle. I thought about calling someone, but my house was in the middle of the woods. I couldn't just step outside and talk to the neighbors. The nearest one was about 2 miles away. I was upset about it at first. To step around my home and not see the impressions of my feet on the floor, the dust remained as if I wasn't there at all. I had mattered at one point, hadn't I? I walked up and down the hallways a lot. I never got tired. The hours would drag on, and my only measurement of time was the sun rising and falling. Even that didn't become very helpful later on. I could never remember what day it was, in what month. Seasons would change and I stopped counting them. Still, the pacing acted as a form of comfort to me. I started counting how many times I could make it up and down the house in a day. 135. It seemed a lot at first, especially to me. But when there's no reason to stop, no meals, no sleep, no bathroom breaks, you travel a lot more ground. It seems so unfair I only have this energy now that I'm dead, and I can only go so far away from my urn. They offered to leave it out back when they wanted me to get a second nurse, so I could leave every once in a while. I told them to just bury it. I would never leave this place, and even if everyone else did. They warned me of what would happen if they did that, how over time I would end up in the same state as the rest of my family. I told them it didn't matter. I would never leave. Why? Why did you leave? After a while, the thought of cleaning my house began to be repulsive to me, as though it would wash away the very sands of time themselves. What, were we put on this earth just to be washed away? How many memories had been cleaned off these walls? No, best to keep it as is. Best to maintain what still showed as proof that I was here, and am still here. I started praying more in those days. Perhaps praying isn't the right word, but I would talk and talk for hours out loud. I'd like to believe that someone was listening. I think it was my husband I had been imagining. He had been my one companion during those last few years, besides Anne, of course. I would bring up the oddities I always had in our marriage. Oh, remember that one time? At some point, I realized that my stories were always about the house. Trials and tribulations when it came to fixing it up, like the leak we had which almost flooded our basement, or the missing shingles on the roof. My husband had fallen over and nearly broke his back. Fortunately, or at least as fortunate as the situation had allowed, a nearby bush broke his fall and he only fractured his leg. This house had been our whole lives. We had been each other's whole world. I tried to imagine what he was up to at the cemetery, if he was telling the same stories as me, if he was making new ones down there. The thought became too painful, so I stopped. Why did you leave? That was before they started sending their spies over. On top of them coming into my house, in between the wallpapers, the city's hooligans also started to creep their ways in. I could hear them outside making bets. $10 if you last 30 seconds inside the crazy old lady's house. They would come up to the door, half the time not even knock, and try to pry it open. I would holler and scream, scaring them off the property, making them run so fast I barely ever saw them turn around. Then the little monsters would be laughing with one another. That's what my existence was to them. A joke. After a few years, I thought the novelty would have worn off. Sure enough, the teens I had seen originally must have grown, but then they brought up their own little monsters who would come and start the cycle again. On and on, until they too became nothing more than a measurement of time. There was one, though. He was persistent. He didn't sneak around like the kids or the spies. He came up to the door and gave it a knock. I didn't know what to do with that. It had been so long since I had any formal guests. I'm not sure what it was that made me say, "Come in," but I did, wondering what he was going to do once he realized the door was locked. He gave the knob a jiggle, and I smiled at his vain efforts. Finally, he called over and asked if I could meet him outside on the porch. I tried to recall the last time I'd actually stepped foot out there. I was capable, of course, but I was just so caught up in my routine of pacing my house and reaching my 135. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and went through. I'm not sure how I expected this man to look, this man who had some business with the old lady in the haunted house. I thought he must have been a lawyer here to represent my husband in regards to something, or a real estate agent, a banker, here to take my property. But he just smiled. "Hello," he said, giving a small bow. I nearly laughed at the formality of the gesture. Never in my life had I been the sort of person people bowed to. He introduced himself as Charlie, and we started talking. He asked a lot of questions about me. how long I had lived here, how long I had been dead. I told him that I was born in this house and had resided in it my entire life. Then I said I didn't know how long I had been dead. I asked him for the year, but when he gave it, I realized that I wasn't sure when exactly I had died. The year was forgotten under the dust. He asked me if I wanted to go for a walk together. I told him not to be stupid, but he insisted that he only meant around the property. I looked out to the woods surrounding my house. I realized then that the trees no longer looked familiar. The little saplings which I had planted myself were now broad and strong. Fruit trees which were normally ripe were now curled and dry. Something about not recognizing my own property bothered me, so I told him all right. It had been so long since I had last spoken with another person, I didn't know where to begin. I'm not sure why I felt it was my responsibility to maintain the conversation. It might have something to do with the fact that we were on my land, yet I reminded myself that this man had invited himself along in the first place. He told me that he was married, so I asked about his wife. He said her name was Robin, that their wedding had been less than a year ago, but that they were already expecting. I snorted, unable to contain myself. Oh, the promises and optimism of youth, to be back in those early days. He asked about my husband. I wasn't sure how he knew I had been married until I looked down at my hands. I had developed a habit of folding them in front of me when I walked, left hand out so the diamond on my engagement ring didn't poke at me. There is no need for this habit anymore, but you know what they say about these things dying hard. I said that we were older when we met, that he had been married before but it hadn't worked out. He had traveled away from the suburbs to the complete rural, hoping for a fresh start in life. We had bumped into one another at a gardening store. I was buying supplies for the harvest, and he was buying seeds to plant. I told him he was doing it backwards, and that if he wanted to start anything new, it would have to wait until spring. He laughed, but took my advice to heart. The rest was history. He never did tell me much about his past, especially his first marriage, and I didn't pry. I was never one to judge those sort of things. Besides, I had really liked this man. We had a lot in common, it turns out. We both appreciated hard work ethics and quiet time. In the evenings, we would sit together in total silence, enjoying one another's company. The birds and insects were our music. He didn't want kids. I didn't want kids. It didn't take long before he proposed, and I gladly accepted. Charlie nodded along as I talked. He asked a few more questions, but nothing that felt evasive towards my privacy. He didn't ask where my husband was or why I was here by myself. I kept on waiting for the subject to pop up, but it never did. On and on we walked and spoke of nothing significant. But it was nice. The nicest afternoon I had in a long time. We circled back around the house, and that was when we said farewell to one another. He asked if it would be all right for him to stop by again sometime, and I said of course. I almost told him that he could come by for tea, but stopped myself. My kettle had been thrown out years ago, even before I had died. It didn't put a damper on my spirits, though. I went back to my house and watched from the window as Charlie turned around to leave, and I smiled. I had walked these floors countless times over the years. I had gone in and out of my 3 bathrooms more times than I ever had in life. I knew every crack on the floor, every growing stain, and yet for the first time in who only knows how long, I went in and looked at a mirror. The face which looked back at me didn't seem like mine. True, nothing had changed about me after all this time, but when I looked back on my life, during a time where I would have been regularly looking in mirrors, I imagined a younger face, one done up with lipstick and mascara, one that still had wrinkles, but a general pleasant aura around her. The face I saw now was a collection of rumples and fat, droopy eyes which hadn't slept in decades, hair that had been strewn in every direction. My clothes, which I had never taken much notice of before, were wrinkled and stained with various fluids in places. All this time I had thought myself as clean, but I looked a dreadful mess. I kept staring into that mirror, wishing I could turn the faucet on and wash my face. I tried to fix my hair, but without anything pinned in, the strands fell back to their original spots. I rubbed at my cheeks, not sure what this was supposed to do, but prayed that somehow the swelling of the wrinkles would smooth out. I suppose my eyes looked the slightest bit less droopy afterwards, but I was still a damn mess. My thoughts went back to Charlie, how his shirt had been tucked in and his hair had combed neatly back. It must have taken a world of willpower not to shirk at the mere sight of me. I tried to remember what my husband had looked like in death, what shirt he had been wearing or what his hair had looked like, but the image of his ghost was being mixed with the image of the man I spent decades with. I had his clothes memorized, but he could have died wearing any one of them. Couldn't that useless nurse have made me up a little pretty before I'd passed? No wonder my husband had left me. Why? Why did you leave? I thought about how Charlie said he would stop by again, and I felt all kinds of flustered. I wished that there was something I could do. Then I started to wish that he wouldn't come back. Then I regretted that wish. This afternoon had been such a breath of fresh... Well, it had been pleasant. But was it worth the embarrassment I was feeling now? What would I tell Charlie when he came back? Do I say I never want to see him again? That wasn't true. Then I tried to convince myself that there was nothing to be so bothered about. He already knew what I looked like. He knew I couldn't change a thing about myself. Yet he had spent the afternoon with me anyway. What did I have to look nice for regardless? The man was already married. That was the first time in ages when I actually paid attention to the passing of days. I had no idea what week we were in or what month, but I acknowledged that the sun was rising and setting. One day, then another, and another. Charlie didn't specify when he'd be back, but after 10 days I'd begun to lose hope. It was probably for the best, I thought. If I didn't have hope, I couldn't be disappointed. It would go back to being just me and my house. My house. My house. Then on the 11th day, I heard a knock on my front door. "Hello," I called over, trying not to sound too excited, but there was only one person who had ever knocked. "Who is it?" As soon as I heard Charlie's voice, I flew over to the door and hovered out of it. There he stood, handsome and clean, opposite to me in every way, but his smile beamed up as if we were long-lost friends. He told me that work was going well and that his wife was due soon. Then he asked how I was holding up, and I said about the same. There was no other answer after all. He gestured towards the woods and asked me if I was in the mood to go on another walk. I smiled, small and shy as a schoolgirl, so thankful that I wasn't capable of blushing, and told him yes. "Tell me about your childhood, Patricia," he said. "Did you go to school here?" I told him that my mama had homeschooled me. He nodded. "Were you big into the outdoors then?" I said that as a farm girl I'd had no choice but to be. He laughed, even though I hadn't meant for it to be a joke. He asked if I had climbed any of these trees before. I peered closely. The trees had grown old, like me, and I tried to recall the times of my youth. But eventually we came to a fork in the road. The path had stayed exactly the same since generations before me, and between that gap stood a large oak older than time itself. It had remained completely untouched by the years. "Yes," I replied, gesturing to the great tree. I made a decent way up this one, matter of fact. He asked me which branch, and I was tempted to point it out. Then I remembered that nothing held me down to the ground anymore. I stepped up into the air, then again and again until I ascended the oak of my childhood. It almost felt like swimming, but lighter. I reached the branch I had in my youth, then realized that with how effortless it had been, I could climb on. I wrapped my hands around branch after branch, even though I didn't need to, until they became so small that they barely fit into my palms. I heard shouting behind me and registered that Charlie was trying to call up to me. I looked down, but he was a tiny ant on the ground. The branches grew around me, encircling me. I felt as though I could touch the clouds, yet I felt no fear. I also felt no pain in my muscles. Hadn't in ages, but this was the first time in a long time that the concept really gripped me. I didn't feel anything beyond exhilaration. The wind blew right past me, rustling the leaves. I had hovered before, but this time it felt as though I were truly flying. I stretched out my arms and let the wind ride on. Not sure how long it had been before I finally got back down, but Charlie had waited for me, still with that big old grin he had. "Bet you haven't done that in a while," he exclaimed. "Never," I confessed, unsure why I felt embarrassed. Never in my life had I done something so... I had a feeling that he wanted to finish my sentence for me, but he just nodded. He peeked out past the trees. "It's starting to get late." That was when I saw the sun had begun to set. Hadn't he gotten here in the morning? How long was I up in that tree? I didn't respond. I just kept looking up at the giant oak. It occurred to me that I could climb it again tomorrow. I didn't need to wait for Charlie to come around. He cleared his throat and repeated himself, which brought me back to the present moment. He offered to walk me home and I accepted. I wasn't ready to go back myself, however. I wanted the pleasure of his company a few moments longer. Our journey back was silent at first, but I didn't mind. Some of the best moments with my husband had been in silence. I perked up my ears to listen to the sounds of the woods. The trees rustling, the birds chirping, the insects buzzing. Something stirred within me as I realized how deeply I had missed these sounds.
Patricia, Charlie began, interrupting my meditation. If you don't mind my asking, where is your family? I mean, that big house and you're all by yourself.
I was so confused by the nature of the question that I didn't have time to feel offended by it. As if on autopilot, I began to explain to him that it was tradition for my family to bury their ashes under the house. He asked if I was aware of what the erosion would eventually do, and I said yes. That was the whole point.
So no one else in your family is still around?
I didn't understand why he was asking me this out of nowhere. Or maybe it only felt out of nowhere because it had been so long since I had last talked to someone. It was normal to ask about a person's family, right? I explained that no, everyone else in my family had gone to the dirt. Long time now. He nodded, not saying a word, as if contemplating where to take the conversation. I kept going before he had a chance to. I asked him where he grew up, what he did as a boy, where his parents were. He said that his only living relative was a little brother, now a man. His father had died of a heart condition and he didn't know where his mother was. I said I was sorry. I almost said that this was why I never had kids, to avoid the tragedy that came with them. But I had sense enough to hold back the comment. We returned to my front porch.
Well,
Charlie said, hands in his pockets. Here we are. I nodded and waited for him to say goodnight and be off, but he kept staring at me. I had a feeling he wanted to ask me something, but was too shy to bring it up in words. He strangely reminded me of my husband in our youth. I remember being able to read him like a book when he went to propose. He hadn't been his usual self at all, but rather a complete nervous wreck, much like how Charlie was acting now. I didn't have delusions that this man was about to propose to me, but still, the shyness in his actions made me smile. "Good night, Charlie," I said patiently, giving the cue for him. He blinked, then shook his head like he was coming out of a trance. Then he laughed at his own actions. He said goodnight in return, then rushed off. I waited on the porch until I could no longer see him. I turned around to go back in through the door, but then thought better of it. I lifted one foot in front of the other and floated up to the roof. I took a seat and gazed up into the night sky. How many years had passed, the stars still looked exactly the same to me. They had withheld the stands of time, just like I had. The only difference was that on this night, they seemed brighter, more vibrant than they ever had in life. Perhaps it was because I was closer to them than ever before. How many years had gone by, and I had never approached this level of beauty until now. I stayed out there until the sun tucked the stars beneath its rays. I counted the days that went by until Charlie came back, but not in the usual way that I did. I spent my time going back outside, becoming familiar with the trees again. If I felt so inclined, I would climb up them and gaze around my property. I never noticed before how old my house looked. It slanted to one side and many shingles were missing from the roof. One of the windows on the upper level was busted. Overall, it seemed grayer than I remembered. All the cracks I had counted over the years to me had been a measuring tool, but now they seemed so prominent. I felt sorry for my house. In my desire to be left alone, I had neglected its needs. I didn't care that time had started to swallow it up because time had no meaning to me. I decided that when Charlie came back, I would ask him to help me fix it. I didn't know how he would feel about taking on such a large project, but there was no one else I trusted. The days went on. I had counted nearly 24. I tried to remain hopeful, tried to tell myself that Charlie was a young man with a family. He must have been busy, too busy to come and see the likes of me. The cracks on the walls, which had once been a familiar sight to me, now became a source of concern. They seemed to grow at an alarming rate considering how I was actually paying attention to the number of days passing. If Charlie didn't come back soon, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I decided I wouldn't ask him to fix up my place personally. I would ask him to help me make the necessary phone calls. My phone hadn't worked in years, but maybe he would know what to do. I started pacing again. I didn't like to leave the house in its current condition. Not that there was anything I could do to help it, but being present felt like the right thing. Besides, I think the spies are back. I can hear them in the walls. They know my name.
Patricia.
They keep whispering it.
Patricia.
First in the night,
Patricia.
now at all hours.
Patricia.
Leave me alone!
Why did you?
Put my hands over my ears, but it's no use. The voices are in my head and they won't shut up. The walls are starting to shake around me. Oh God, they're getting smaller, I swear. This house is suffocating. Why am I alone? A knock on the door. For a brief moment, everything has stopped. The voices are quiet, the walls are still. I continued to stand there until a second knock happened. Who is it? I don't know why I still ask this question when there was only one person it could be. I never wanted to get my hopes up too high. It's me, Patricia, came the voice in the other end. It's Charlie. To say I all but ran out of that house was an understatement. I burst through the door before he had a chance to finish stating his name. I was so relieved to see him that I could hardly speak. That serenity did not last, however. As soon as I saw Charlie, my smile diminished. He looked out of breath, as though he had run over here. More than that, he was pale, with dark bags under his eyes. Charlie, I asked, are you all right? He laughed, but I didn't see what was so funny. The laughing seemed to hurt him anyway as he coughed and sputtered in between. I wanted to offer him to come and sit down, but neither of us had a way to open the door. Well, frankly, no, he said at last. His lips seemed to force themselves into a smile. Something about it unnerved me. Charlie had always seemed so genuine. Now it felt like I was speaking to the world's worst car salesman. On the bright side, my wife is doing well, he went on. I nodded to be polite. Doctors say I need to rest, but she does as well, don't she? After labor and all. I hadn't forgotten that his wife was pregnant, but she must have been further along than I had thought. I saw his line of logic, yet I didn't understand what it had to do with me. If he had a wife and child to wait upon and his own health at stake, why was he coming up here for a visit? Not that I was about to point this out. He coughed once more, then cleared his throat for a good while. Listen, Patricia. Something about the way he said my name shook at my insides. It reminded me of the day my husband said he was leaving me for the cemetery. Listen, Patricia. What had I done in my entire life besides listen? Listen to my parents, listen to my husband, listen to my nurse. Charlie had been the first one to want to listen to me for a change, and now here he was, asking me also to listen. Rage began to bubble up, but I kept quiet, waiting for this man to continue. My family is growing. Right now, my wife and I live in this little apartment. It was perfect when it was just the two of us, but now... I didn't give him a chance to finish. If I were capable of it, I would have slapped him at that moment. But I did the only thing I could do, and that was fly back up to the roof. I could hear him yelling down at me, begging me to come back. But his wasn't the only voice I could hear. I could hear my husband once more, telling me that it was time for him to move on. That I could come with if I wanted, but that he couldn't bear to stay any longer. Over and over again I heard him saying those words. I could hear Charlie's lies running through my mind. He had never wanted to be my friend. He had just wanted my house. He wanted to clean up my dust and erase my memory, erase me. Then beneath that, I could hear the voices of my parents begging me not to leave. The walls were screaming. Why did you leave? Why did you leave? Why did you leave? Why did you leave? I began to scream. I wanted the voices to be drowned out. I screamed louder and louder, my voice echoing around until it resounded back to me, as though the trees themselves were crying out in anguish alongside me. I could hear something else beneath all of that. I thought a storm was about to break, that the thunder and lightning were crackling through. The sky was now joining us in our screams. Then I realized that the noise was happening beneath me. The cracks in my house were rising up, climbing to the roof as I had. The first thing to go was the kitchen my husband had remodeled, then the roof of my porch. Windows shattered at random intervals. The dust, my dust, billowed up, swallowing me whole in one complete swoop. And then we were gone. A message from the void. Why did I leave? Why weren't you worth staying for?